Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. We have a lot of people from all over. In the spirit of sharing locations, I am based in Edinburgh, so all of my UK folks, I see we're probably all at the same time, which is always nice. My name is Hannah Gould. I'm the Digital Marketing Officer for the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to ICMEC's webinar, Receiving Disclosures, Do's and Don'ts. So today you will hear a presentation from ICMEC's Medical Director, Dr. Jordan Greenbaum, and our Director of Global School Initiatives, Debbie Downs. So Dr. Greenbaum has a wealth of experience and subject matter expertise as a result of her over 20 years of experience working with suspected victims of child sexual and physical abuse, sexual exploitation, and trafficking. She now trains locally, nationally, and internationally to help professionals such as yourselves to prevent, identify, and intervene in cases of suspected abuse and trafficking. Debbie also brings valuable expertise with 18 years of experience in international education and child protection. She now continues to develop and provide child protection training, support, and resources to international schools around the world with ICMEC as a part of an initiative funded by the US Department of State, Office of Overseas School. Just so you are aware, a few announcements. This webinar is going to be recorded and available on our YouTube channel after the fact. There will be a discussion through the chat, and also we believe you should be able to raise your hand to speak as well. We'll also have a short Q&A session following the presentation, so please feel free to add any additional questions in the Q&A section or the chat section, and we'll get to them at the end. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Greenbaum and Debbie.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, especially at all different times of the day and night. And we really appreciate it. I'm going to get started for several slides and then hand over to Debbie, and we'll sort of tag team. Let me just share my screen, if that's OK. I'll give me just a second and slideshow.
And I'll do my best to monitor the chat and any raised hands throughout. So do feel free, if you have a question that comes up, feel free to stick it in the chat or raise your hand or any comments.
Thanks, Debbie. All right, we're hoping that at the end of this session, you'll be familiar with a couple of things. Age-related changes in a child's ability to describe what's happened to them. And that sort of implies what their age-related changes in memory and creating memories and then retrieving those memories and telling us about them. And then recall 3 or more helpful techniques to use when talking to children as they are disclosing abuse or when you suspect abuse or neglect. And then be familiar with 3 ways to support a child and their family after the abuse or exploitation has come to light. And I think we're all familiar with how traumatizing it can be once the allegations are known and there's a sort of a community response that can cause a lot of trauma inadvertently and certainly a lot of stress. Okay, let's begin by looking at how what children can tell us about what's happened to them at various ages. The question is, can a very young child provide information? And many times I've been spoken with people, child protection officers and people during my career, and they say, well, you know, this child is reporting sexual abuse, but they're only 4. What can they tell us? It's not worth interviewing them. Actually, it is worth interviewing them because they have a lot they can tell us. And there's been a lot of research done over the past maybe 30, 40 years looking at memories and narrative abilities of very young children. And we know that very young children are certainly going to remember less than an adult or an older adolescent. They don't have the capacity to pay attention to all the things that are going on around them during the event, so they can't lay down those memories. And then it's harder for them to reconstruct the memories and tell us about them. They can't give us coherent narratives. This happened first, and then this, and then that. They can't do that. They may recall different things on different occasions because they're picking up fragments of different parts of the event in their memories, and so it doesn't all come together. Doesn't mean that they're lying to you or lying to me. It means that they're accessing different parts of the experience at different times. And young children are especially prone to magical thinking where they will attribute the cause of some event to something totally unrelated. Like, my grandmother died last week. It was because I argued with my sister or something. So that caused grandma's death or something. So that sort of magical thinking is common among very young children. But let's take a few examples. This is a 4-year-old girl, and she is limping. You notice that she's limping, and you ask her, why are you limping? And she says, my bottom got hurt. That's all she says. So this could be any of a number of things. Her bottom could be hurting because she fell accidentally, because she was sexually abused. It may be because she's got some sort of infection and that hurts. We don't know. Very, very non-specific. What information could she provide? A 4-year-old girl. Well, she's going to be able to provide some very concrete information. Things like if somebody did do something to her or somebody pushed her down, for example, she could say who that person was. Now she's going to use her own language and her own names, but she could tell you who, and she could tell you basically what happened. I fell, I was pushed, he touched me, and she's going to use her own language for this. So for example, if she was sexually abused and a man touched her with his penis, she might say, he touched me with his doo-doo or something. So she's going to use her own words. She could say where something happened. Was it at school? Was it at home? Was it at the park? And probably could tell you if it happened one time or more than one time. We would not want to ask her how many times it happened, because at 4, she has no way of telling us that, no way of recording that. So she would try to guess to please us, and she might say 100 times. So we know we're not going to get a good answer. So we shouldn't ask questions about the number of times something happened, the frequency, or ask her for a sequence of events, because she's not going to be able to tell us that. That's beyond what her capabilities are going to be. She's also not going to be able to give us a time frame when something happened. The child at 4, 3 lives in the moment. So yesterday might have been a year ago. Tomorrow is not even thought of. You're living in the moment. So asking about when something happened is not going to get you a very good answer. They're also not necessarily able to collect things and categorize things in adult-like ways. So for example, kind of a classic example is when we think about clothing, were you wearing clothes? Adults think of clothing as any sort of clothing that's on us, whether it's clothing for outside or bedtime or formal clothing, informal. It's very broad categories, whereas a child may think of clothing as only being stuff that you wear outside. So pajamas would not be clothing. So if you said, did you have any clothes on? They would say no, even if they had pajamas on, because they're categorizing it differently. They also don't keep track of pronouns very easily. So it's really helpful to continuously use a person's name instead of referring to him as him or her over many sentences, because they can lose track of who you're talking about. Let's move a little further on to the age development scale. A 10-year-old girl tells you, Mr. Lopez touches me and I don't like it. What information could she provide, perhaps, that the 4-year-old could not provide? Well, we know that she could do the who, what, where, just like the 4-year-old could. But assuming she's developmentally on track, she could also provide many more details, because her brain is able to pay attention to more things that are going on when the event is happening. So she can record peripheral details, idiosyncratic details about smells and sights and sounds that the 4-year-old wouldn't have picked up on. She's able to tell you if it happened on 2 occasions, she could probably tell you which event happened first. But she is not going to be reliably able to tell you a sequence of events. So if they happened 4 times, we would not want to ask her, tell me about the first, second, third, and fourth, and hold her to that narrative, because she's not able to put that in sequence yet. Her narrative is more organized than the 4-year-old. She's able to have sort of a beginning, a middle, and an end to her narrative about an event, and she's able to incorporate emotions into it, both her own emotions and perhaps the emotions of another person. She's also able to start to think about intent, her own intent, another person's intent. So that's much more sophisticated than the 4-year-old. But she's still not good at providing a time frame. So when something happened, how many times it happened, or the sequence of events. So we really should be very careful about that. Now people will say, well, you could say, did it happen before or after Christmas or Ramadan? What did some major event? But that is even a little dicey, because the whole before and after is still not absolutely there. So you may or may not get a good answer. Children begin after about the age of 10, they begin to have a much better concept of time. So they can give you more information about how many times something event occurred and when it occurred. But before then, it's very, it's iffy, and you may or may not have a child who can give you that information. So need to be careful about that. They're still trying to understand abstract concepts. We need to be very concrete. And like the 4-year-old, they don't they don't handle negatives very well. So you want to be careful not to have especially double negatives. That can be confusing even to an adult. So we try to frame things as simply and in a positive as we can. Okay, now let's move into adolescence. And we know that adolescence is a big, steep curve for brain development, but we're going to plop ourselves right in the middle of adolescence. 15-year-old girl is being sextorted by her former boyfriend. Her boyfriend convinced her to send pictures of her breasts, and she did so because she thought it was her way of showing that she, quote, loved him. And then they break up 2 weeks later, and now he's threatening to show those photos on the internet if she doesn't send more photos. Now, what information could she provide? Well, she's a much more sophisticated level. This age group, 12 to 17, is a broad one. So these skills are going to be much more well developed at 16, 17 than the 12 to 13-year-old age group. But during this period, there is a marked improvement in a person's ability to provide details and a sequential narrative. For example, if this child is 15, she's probably pretty good at able to say, okay, met him at this time. We became, we started to become girlfriend, boyfriend at this time. I sent him the pictures then, and then we broke up, and then yeah. So she can give you a narrative, and even more so at age 17. We remember that the adolescents may or not be able to understand abstract concepts consistently, so we have to be careful with how they might interpret our abstract questions. And they tend to, as we all did when we were adolescents, tend to sensationalize things, and that may affect the way they describe the things that happen to them. They may feel very embarrassed and get easily intimidated, especially by adults. And so that may lead them to try to give you the answer you expect, or so we need to be very careful not to intimidate them or make them feel ashamed, because that may affect the way they answer our questions. And they're certainly very concerned about peer acceptance and making themselves be, quote, normal and not outside the peer range. So if there's something about the sextortion episode that makes them feel very abnormal or ashamed, they may be reluctant to tell us about it. Well, what about children with learning disabilities and intellectual disabilities? There has been a lot of research done on this population of children. And of course, there's tremendous variability from mild intellectual delays to very severe intellectual disabilities. So we need to keep that in mind. But so there's variation in children's ability to provide narratives. But in general, children with fairly mild to moderate disabilities are able to give us good information if we ask the right questions. We need to talk to the caregiver about the best way to speak to a child, what level they are, their, quote, mental level, their mental development level, and the best ways to communicate. And then we need to target our questions in our approach at a level that is consistent with their developmental age rather than their chronological age. And that's obvious. If it's an 11-year-old who is at a 7-year-old developmental level, we would pitch our questions at the 7-year-old level, not the 11-year-old level. If the child has more severe intellectual disabilities, we would pitch it even lower than their developmental level, just to be sure. And you can still ask open-ended questions, and we'll get into that in a minute, but they're very good at providing narrative. You just have to give them a little more time and perhaps ask more questions, open-ended questions, to sort of keep them going. But they are definitely able to give us information. So don't give up on a child with Down syndrome, for example, or a child on the spectrum. Don't just assume they can't tell us anything. They often can. Okay, so we've talked about all the different brain development stages. What do you do if you suspect a child is being abused or exploited? You may or may not have much information. How do you respond to this? Well, we need to know how to proceed, we need to know what our role is. For many of us, we would be a first responder, and that would be the first person, the first authority figure to learn about the abuse or the exploitation. And so that is very different than a person who sort of follows up, gets that key information from a professional, and then now is going to delve deeper, the sort of the key interviewer, if you will. So you have to know what your role is. And you also have to know who else is going to be interviewing the child. Our goal is to not cause more trauma to the child. The more we ask questions, the more people who cycle through and ask the same thing over and over and sort of persist in asking the child questions, the more traumatizing that is to the child, and the more likely they're going to feel bad and shut down. So we want to minimize the times the child has to tell their story. And that's going to affect how we respond, knowing who else is going to be involved. What is the country or the local infrastructure? Do they have a very sophisticated police force that's going to be asking a lot of key questions, in which case minimize our questions. If they don't have a very sophisticated authority response, then we might have to ask different questions. So knowing the layout of what's going to happen when an allegation comes to light is very helpful. Now, I talked a little bit about first responders and the second responder, the key interviewer. Let's look at the differences in those roles. As a first responder, for example, a teacher in a classroom who has a student come up and say, my bottom hurts, or I don't like the way Mr. Lopez touches me. Suppose you're a teacher getting that. Well, you'd be the first responder. That's not planned. You didn't wake up this morning and say, I have a feeling that Loretta is going to talk to me about what Mr. Lopez does and how she doesn't like it. I just get that feeling. I better be prepared. No, you had no idea. You thought this was going to be a normal day. So when this happens, it comes out of the blue, and your response is likely to be informal. You didn't plan it. You are not trained to be a forensic interviewer. Unfortunately, you don't need that training because your functions are very basic. You need to be able to, in your mind, answer these questions in your mind. Do I have a concern for abuse? Not am I certain abuse has occurred, but do I have a concern that abuse or exploitation has occurred? And if so, I need to take it to the next step, typically mandatory reporting if you're in a country with that law. The next question you need to ask yourself is this child safe in the near future, the next few hours? So if the child is saying, my father touches me, and she's telling you or he's telling you about this early in the morning, you've got several hours before the end of the school day to figure out what's going on and what to do. If they're telling you right before they're getting on the bus to go home, that's a real instant emergency because you can't have the child go home. So knowing about the immediate safety. And then providing support is really the key thing. So reacting in a way that is very supportive for the child is really the key for the first responder. And you don't have to ask a lot of questions. Once you know whether you're concerned for abuse or not and whether the child is immediately safe or not, there's not a whole lot of other questions you need to ask before passing this on. The second responder, on the other hand, has a different role. Whether you are a police officer, a child protective services worker, perhaps a child protection officer at a school, whatever you are the second person to learn. And so, for example, the teacher may tell the child protection officer, or I might, as a healthcare professional, might call police and tell them, I'm the first responder, I call police and tell them, this is what I know. So as a second responder, you get some information from me or from the first responder, and you have a chance to sort of figure out what you want to do and what you need to do. You can plan your interview of the child. It's more formal, and your goals are different. Your goals are to figure out what happened and how to protect the child. If you are not authorities, you need to figure out, do I need to notify authorities, for example? What are the next steps with my role? So it's more in depth than the first responder, but it varies because you may not be the formal forensic interviewer, which is a different role. So we have to know exactly what our role is. Do we need to protect the child? Is that our main goal? Is our main goal to figure out what happened? And that's going to steer you in the types of questions you're going to ask. And let's get into those types of questions. There are different ways that we ask people questions. And when you and I are having conversations, we ask a lot of questions and we use different formats. That's just part of the language and communication. Some of these formats are more reliable than others when we are trying to ensure that the person we're questioning is going to give us an accurate answer. So questions that rely on recall memory are the most reliable types of questions to use when you really want to get the truth from somebody, an accurate answer. And recall memory requires that the person answer your question using only the information they've stored in their own memory. They have to retrieve the information. You're not giving them anything. So they can only give you what they remember, which is good. That's what we want, because that's what we really care about. On the other hand, recognition memory is a little less reliable because it allows the person who's asking the question to give you information. And you, as a person answering, has to compare in your memory to the choices that you've been given. You say, oh, yes, that choice. I recognize that information. That choice is what I remember. So it's a little easier because the person asking the question is giving you information. And because it's easier, it's not as reliable. Leading and suggested questions can fall under each, but let's look a little bit more closely at these types of questions. As I mentioned, open-ended questions or cued invitation questions are relying on recall memory, and they essentially introduce a broad topic, don't give any other information, say, tell me all you know about X. So I might say to a child who's been to the park yesterday, I might say, tell me all about your visit to the park. I'm not giving any more information other than we're talking about the park. Tell me everything. And the child can say who was there, what happened, whatever they want, they can tell me about. But they have to search their own memory for the memories of the park. I'm not giving them any information. A cued invitation may be if the child says, I was in the park, I played on the slides, I really had a good time. A cued invitation would be calling them back to a particular part of the experience that they've disclosed, the slides, and saying, tell me more about being on the slides. So you're focusing in a little bit more, but it's still very broad and they can tell you anything they wanted. Now you can have an entire conversation, an entire interview with a child using these open-ended and cued questions. For example, you might say, tell me all about being at school. Well, I was at school and I really had a good time on the playground and I was playing and I played ball. Oh, you played ball. Tell me more about playing ball. Well, I did this, I did that. I played with a bunch of my friends. Oh, you played with your friends. Tell me more about your friends. So you're marching along, sort of continuously asking them, expand on this. And they can give, even a 4-year-old can give you a lot of information on this. Okay. At some point, the 4-year-old, the 15-year-old, the 25-year-old is going to run out of steam when you're asking narrative open-ended questions. They've told you everything they can remember, but that may be not including some information that is vital to you. If you're the police officer, for example, or you're the Child Protective Services worker, you need to fill in some blanks. So you might then go back to ask recall questions that are detailed. And these sort of target the child and sort of hone them in on specific parts of their narrative that they've already disclosed and ask specific questions. Who, what, where? You said that somebody turned on the light. Who turned on the light? You said she hit you. What did she hit you with? So they're very focused questions and they're relying on information the child has already disclosed. That's absolutely key. We don't ask questions unless the child has already disclosed. I was hit. What did she hit you with? He said this. Who is he? And these questions can help fill in specific aspects of the story that have not been covered in the free narrative. But you want to stick to the open-ended questions as much as you can. So if you ask open-ended questions, you hone in on a detail. Who turned on the light? Jeffrey turned on the light. Tell me more about Jeffrey turning on the light. There, you're back open to open-ended questions in your safe zone. We want to try to avoid yes, no, and multiple choice questions when we can, because they are very limiting. A yes, no question gives you one of two answers, and it's very easy and tempting for the child to guess if they don't know. Children of any age are reluctant to say they don't know. So they might guess. If you've given multiple choice or yes, no, they just guess, or they give you the answer they think you want to know. So we try to stay away from those. Now, you can't always stay away from yes, no questions. Some questions are just, they're yes, no. Was there bleeding? It's kind of yes, no question. So what you can do is if they say, yes, there was bleeding, then you can revert to follow up with an open-ended question. Tell me about the bleeding. And that gives you into the safer zone. We want to stay away from leading or suggestive questions. Leading questions are questions where we introduce new information that the child has never disclosed. So for example, if the child is saying that they were gang raped by several boys, and the child says, and then afterwards the boys all left, it would be a leading question if I said, what did the boys say before they left? Because I don't know that they said anything before they left. I'm implying they did. And this may be confusing to a child, and they may feel like, well, she's an adult, she must know what's going on. I must have forgotten what they said, I better make it up or something. And they're going to get confused. So we don't want to introduce new information and have a leading question. We also want to avoid suggestive questions, which they're so common in our everyday conversation, but they are little tags at the end of a question that imply the answer you're looking for. I'll bet that hurt, didn't it? Well, certainly you said no, didn't you? That didn't you implies the answer that you're looking for. And more than likely, the child is going to give you that answer because they are assuming that you want that answer. You're the authority figure. They're going to give it to you. Now, if you're the first responder, the teacher, the nurse, the doctor who's getting the first disclosure, are we going to want to ask all these questions? No, I don't need to know all these questions. I basically need to know, am I concerned about abuse and is the child safe? So I'm not going to ask all these questions, but the format of the questions is what is important. So when you're thinking to yourself, okay, what questions do I ask? Think about your role. Are you the first responder? Are you the second responder? Are you the formal forensic interviewer where you have to get absolute details to support a criminal investigation? And then ask yourself, and this is really good advice that I gave myself a long time ago, is I have to know why I'm asking a question. You don't want to ask a question if you're not going to do anything with the information. And this is an old thing from medicine. Never do a diagnostic test if you're not going to do anything with the information. And the same thing you do with questions. Don't ask a question if it's not going to help you do your job. So if I'm a first responder, I'm not going to say, what color dress were you wearing when Mr. Lopez touched you? That's totally irrelevant. A police person might want to know that, but I don't need to know that. So I'm not going to ask that question. If it's not going to help me make a decision about what my role and what I need to do, I'm not going to ask it. The other thing to do is, can I ask yourself, can I get this information from someone else? Especially as the second responder, you can get a lot of information from other people. The first responder can tell you everything they know. And if they're a reliable person, you don't necessarily need to ask all the same questions. There's nothing more traumatizing and infuriating, and we know this as adults, than being asked the same question multiple times, especially if it's about something sensitive. As you get very frustrated and feel like you're not being listened to. So we want to avoid that. So ask other people, get information from other people if you can. A couple more handy dandy tips to use when you're talking to children. It helps to frame your questions. You know, when you're reading the newspaper, you check the headlines, you read the headlines. I want to read this story, I want to read that story. Nah, that one's boring. The headlines tell you what to expect. The same is with framing your questions. Now I want to talk about the park. And that tells the child everything from now on we're talking about relates to the park. And then when we're done talking about the park, I'm going to announce a change to a transition. Now I'd like to talk about being at school. So I'm framing the questions, and that's very helpful, especially for young children, but it's helpful even for adults. You need to clarify terms and then use those terms once you know what they are. Now, we all know that children, young children have any number of names for their genitals. My hoo-hoo, my cookie jar, my pocketbook, my purse, my doo-doo, whatever. And so you may say, if somebody says he touched my poo-poo, then you might say, okay, what is your poo-poo? Or can you point to your poo-poo? And then once you've established what it is, you can use that term because that's familiar to the term. And this is not just for young children. When you're talking to an adolescent, think about this. If you talk to an adolescent, they say, I had sex with him or her. We need to say, a lot of people have different ways of interpreting what sex means. When you say I had sex, what exactly do you mean? And it's the child's going to get very embarrassed. Oh, go! But we still need to pin them down because what they define as sex may not be what I define. So we need to make sure we understand that. And the caveat I would say to this is don't use the word if it's something derogatory. If a child is using a word that is derogatory towards themselves, I would not use that word. So sometimes people can be very critical. And so I would not use that word if that's a term. Keep it simple, keep it short, one idea per question. We don't want to have these run-on questions, multiple ideas per question. And avoiding negatives, especially double negatives, because it's very hard. You didn't do that, did you? You didn't say no, did you? It's very complicated. It's hard for a child to wrap their head around that. We need to remain objective. We need to be aware of our own biases. Don't select questions that are simply going to affirm your assumptions. If I walk into a conversation with a child who says, Mr. Lopez touched me, and I'm assuming Mr. Lopez sexually abused the child, all my questions are going to be related to that. I have to be much more open-minded about what that might mean and have questions that can address any hypothesis. Keep in mind that children of any age may begin using words before they truly understand them. And this is true especially for young and school age kids. So remember when I was talking about the time issue with the 6 to 10-year-olds before versus after, that is tricky. Before and after are rather abstract. And so we need to realize that a child may start using that. This is before Christmas, may use that word, not really understanding that. above, below, over, under, before, after. Those are pretty complex words. So keep that in mind and try to figure out ways to corroborate what the child's saying, so you're sure that you and he are on the same page. And these are just some active listening skills that you probably do every day, but can be very helpful, especially when you're talking to younger children. You want to sit at eye level, and if this is culturally appropriate, maintain eye contact. Children may or may not feel comfortable with eye contact, so you can get a sense of that by looking at how much eye contact they give you. And it may be that consistent eye contact makes them uncomfortable. So you may want to sit at a little bit of an angle, sort of be looking off to one side and make occasional eye contact with them so that you're not intimidating them. Give them undivided attention. You don't want to be writing a lot of notes while you're talking or being on the computer. I find it helpful to summarize every once in a while to make sure I understand what the child is saying. And to show that I'm listening. So you said you were at the park and you were on the slides. Is that right? Did I get that right? Yes. Okay. We want to remain open and non-judgmental, no matter what we're thinking in our minds about what this teenager did or said, or we have to be non-judgmental and open. And respecting their perspective. So let's take an example. If a child, a 14-year-old boy, talks about having sex with his teacher, let's say, and he sees this as a loving relationship. He does not see this as exploitative at all. So we would want to accept that perspective and not challenge him during the interview, saying, are you kidding? This woman or this man is completely taking advantage of you. They don't love you, they're exploiting you. If we say that, the child is going to shut down and say, they don't understand it at all. They don't understand what's going on with me. I can't talk to them. So we need to respect the child's perspective. Okay, how do we talk to a distressed child? And this also works for distressed caregivers, by the way. All of this works for adults. We want to use the trauma-informed approach. You're probably familiar with that, or at least familiar with the concepts, maybe perhaps not with the term, but we want to be sensitive to how the trauma that this child or this adult has experienced, how that impacts the way they're behaving with us, their thoughts, their feelings. We want to establish and maintain and facilitate the sense of psychological safety and build trust the whole time we're talking with them and interacting with them. We want to be very transparent. No surprises here. As much as we can, be transparent about what we want to do, why we want to do it, and what's going to happen next. That is very respectful and transparent, and it eases a lot of anxiety. We want to empower children and adults as much as we can. They tend to see themselves as victims. We want them to see more of themselves as not just a victim, but a survivor and somebody with a lot of personal strength who is able to get through very difficult experiences and has a lot, the whole life ahead of them is what we want them to see. And we want to respect privacy and confidentiality, which is exquisitely important in cases of abuse, exploitation, and trafficking. There are lots of confidentiality and safety issues we need to be very well aware of. So you're probably familiar with this, but just as a quick reminder, when a child or an adult has a traumatic event, that's going to really change the way they see the world around them. They may not see the world as a safe place anymore once they've been sexually abused or sex trafficked, for example. They may see the world and everybody in it as a very hostile place. Everybody wants to take advantage of them. No one can be trusted. They may see themselves as worthless, except for sex, helpless, hopeless, never able to have a life. Their life is ruined. So their whole self-concept has changed. And this is going to affect their attitudes and their behaviors and their feelings. And that's all going to impact you when you're talking to the child. All of that is going to be impacting the things they say to you, the way they interpret what you say, the feelings they have about you, about themselves, about what you want to do. That's all going to be affected by this prior trauma experience. And so we need to recognize that and take that into consideration. And I'll give you a quick example. I'm a healthcare provider. Let's say I have a child who was identified in a local police sting operation as being exposed to child sex trafficking. So the police raid a hotel, they find this young adolescent. She's with her boyfriend, who is her trafficker, and she's with a sex buyer. They take her, according to protocol, they take her to the hospital for a medical evaluation. They take her boyfriend, trafficker, to the police station. Okay, so the child's been in the hospital for 3 hours before I'm called. Somebody forgot to call me. I come in. So the child has been there for 3 hours. This is the middle of the night. She's traumatized. And I walk in, I'm about to say, hi, I'm Dr. da 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 da, and I can't even get the hello out. She comes at me with both guns firing. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to the nurse. I don't want to be here. I shouldn't be here. I don't know why I'm here. You can just get the hell out of here. Whoa. It would be easy for me to become very defensive or become very hurt or just reject her. Okay, you don't want me, I don't want you. Easy, that's sort of the trigger reactive, reflective reaction. But with a trauma-informed approach, I would step back and say, why is she acting this way? Well, maybe it's because she's afraid. She has no control over the situation. She's worried about her boyfriend. She's afraid of what's going to happen next. She doesn't want to go back into foster care. And she's completely confused and feeling helpless. That might cause her to take the offense and come at me aggressively as a way to defend herself. If I can understand that, it's much easier for me to step back and be very non-judgmental. Say something like, wow, you have had a heck of a night. I know a little bit about what's happened, but I don't know very much. So if you don't mind, would you tell me about it? I'm inviting her to share. I'm acknowledging her feelings and inviting her to share about it. And that's the trauma-informed approach. Debbie, I hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. So we're going to walk through a few scenarios together. This one will be heavily me talking, and then we'll do a few where I'm going to ask that you all participate with me. For these, I know that there are people in this training from all over the world, which means that the role between whether you're the first responder or the second responder might look very different. So for these scenarios, let's assume that you're a second responder, because I think we had a hard time writing scenarios where we weren't sure that there was a concern of abuse. So I think just in the scenario, there's enough information for you to be concerned that abuse is happening. So let's assume that we're the second responder in these scenarios. So a 14-year-old child has come to us to say that her driver has been molesting her for 3 months. This child tried to tell her mom, but the mom didn't believe her because the driver has worked for the family for 20 years. So we're trying to obtain some basic information from the child. Oh, I wrote first responder. I think we're going to go a little deeper here. Okay, Jordan, would you please go to the next one? Thank you. So how do we want to begin with this child? So first, like Jordan said, we want to figure out our role. So in this case, we are hopefully in a country where this is something that we can report to law enforcement. So we need to get enough information where we are ready to bring that to either law enforcement or child protective services or whatever the equivalent is in the country where we're operating. So we want to figure out, is the child currently safe? Are there maybe any other victims? And what support does the child need from us right now? So as we continue talking to the girl, we notice she's withdrawn, she's avoiding eye contact, she's mumbling her answers, which, as Jordan was just going over, is a normal response to trauma. So it's our job to make her feel comfortable and start to develop a rapport with her so that she'll be ready to give us some more information. So we might start with something like, you know, I'd really like a cup of tea, would you? And then get some tea. Is there anything else you need to be comfortable right now? And then move on to things like, a lot's happened today. How are you feeling right now? And get her to talk about her feelings before we start to ask her some difficult questions. We do want to ask the child for consent for us to ask more questions if, as long as we can honor that consent if it's given. We don't want to ask for consent when if she says no, we can't honor that. We also want to explain the process that we're going to use once she's told us, or even with the initial disclosure that she's already given. We want to make sure that she knows exactly what the process is that we're going to follow. So before we get started, I'd like to explain a bit about what usually happens in these type of situations, and explain whether you're going to need to call the police, child protective services, who this information will be shared with, anything else that's relevant to the process that she should know. And that's for the transparency piece that Jordan was talking about. Okay, next slide, please. So we want to make this child as comfortable as possible while speaking to us by getting on her eye level, letting her see us if she wants to, watching her body language, and praising her, thanking her for coming forward. It was brave to tell me what you have already. So thank you very much for sharing this with me. I just have a few more questions. We want to make sure we're listening carefully and attentively, and that we're letting her speak in her own words. So at this point, what are some promises, and I'd love to hear from the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, what are some promises that you do not want to make right now? When you're speaking to her, what are promises that you should never make? Preeti, I see your hand.
I think we shouldn't promise full confidentiality because it should be need to know basis.
Excellent. We cannot promise confidentiality. We can't keep secrets. Yes. And I see in the chat some that we'll get the perp locked up. Very good. Yes, we cannot promise that we'll get the perpetrator locked up. That we won't tell anyone, that everything will be okay. Yeah, we can't make that promise. Good, that everything will be all right. Okay, promise not to tell, and that the abuser will be accused. Yeah, we're not ready to make any promises about what might happen to the potential abuser, or what might happen to the child from here. And we definitely don't want to promise to keep secrets. So great. Anything to add on that, Jordan, of what we don't want to say? Yeah, basically don't make any promises that you don't have the power to keep.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all I needed on that slide. And just a reminder not to, don't ask questions beyond the information you need. I think Jordan covered that as well. Before starting a second responder conversation, you might want to set expectations with the child. So I'll give you a moment to read through these expectations. And these are an example, but it's just kind of nice to have on the table what you expect of the child and what the child might expect of you before you start the conversation. Any questions or thoughts on these? So this is all in the spirit of transparency and making the child comfortable so that they know what to expect from your conversation.
Can I add one thing, Debbie?
Yeah, please do.
When we were saying to the child to tell the truth, now truth is a difficult concept. So one way you could sort of get at that is to say, I want to hear from you, but I want you to tell me only the things that you know happened, not things that you think might have happened, but things that you know happened. And that's a little bit more concrete.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So we do want to make this a conversation, we don't want it to feel to the child like an interrogation. That's going to encourage them to clam up and not trust us. So we want to make this feel very much like a conversation. We want to make sure we're not expressing disapproval, whether it's in our body language or our words. We don't want to blame or shame the victim again, with either what we say or what we do. We do not want to say anything bad about the alleged offender. This might be someone who the child is very close with and who they need to continue to have a relationship with over time. And so we just but no matter what, we want to be very careful that we're not saying anything bad about the offender to the child. And again, don't make promises you can't keep. Any questions or thoughts on what you don't do? Okay. And just some brief reminders, because I know we're throwing a lot of information at you. While you're talking with the child, make sure that you are being respectful of the child the entire time, of their comfort, of their needs, and just demonstrating respect towards them. Make sure you're explaining everything that you are doing currently, what you will do in the future. Obtain consent, again, in as much as you have control over. Ask for their consent in everything you're talking about, but make sure that you have control, that if they say no, you don't have to push on that. And then maintain transparency, which is just by telling them everything that's going on. I see a question. It's hard to show you believe the child while remaining objective because we can't assume guilt on the other side, especially when it's between two children, because we have a duty of care to both involved. Excellent. Yeah, we do. It's very important to remember your duty of care. And we do have a duty to the offender, whether it's an adult or a child, but especially if it's a child, to make sure that they are also treated with respect throughout the process. And that's a great point to bring up, because there's also a significant chance of self-harm, both for the victim and for the alleged offender. So that's one reason to just keep in mind that we need to maintain respect for everybody involved. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to talk through this scenario together. So again, in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand. So you're a nurse in a clinic, you're helping an 11-year-old boy get ready for an exam, and you notice prominent bruising on his back. The bruises look very much like marks from a cane or some other kind of stick. You don't know the child before today, you have no pre-existing relationship. So what are some of your thoughts on how you might start a conversation with this child about what you've just observed? What are some ways that you might start to talk to them? Mariana.
Oh, I'm just trying to also work around what you've told us today. I would probably, yes, but I would start the conversation without being too direct. Maybe ask if anything happened, did you fall? If they say they didn't fall, then maybe progress to the next question, like what happened. If they are willing to talk about it, fine. If they're not, in the course of the examination, I can continue with the other examining procedures and continue to bring up questions intermittently based on their response.
Excellent, good. So some open-ended questions about what happened. How did you get bruises on your back? And I'm seeing, starting with observe. Oh, I see some bruises on your back. And building rapport, showing care in general before asking about the bruises. Yeah, all great. Thank you, Mariana, and thank you for the answers in the chat. All good.
I think you can also, you can also start by pointing to little scars. Every kid has scars on their legs, right, from falling. Say, oh, how'd you get this scar on, on your knee? Oh, I fell, or whatever. It's things that are really benign. And then you can say, oh, I see there's a mark on your back. Can you tell me about that? I like the open-ended questions. If you say, did you fall? That's kind of leading. So you might say, can you tell me what happened? And then often say, I don't remember, or something.
Karen wrote that in the chat as well. Don't lead. You can just say, oh, I see you have some marks on your back. Does it hurt? Can you tell me how it happened? So yeah, good intros. So what are some ways, you mentioned some of them in starting with some innocuous questions, some general well-being questions. Are there any other ways you can think of to help create a safe environment where the child is feeling comfortable talking to you before you get into any questioning?
One thing that you could say is, my job is to make sure that your body is healthy from head to toe. And part of that, so I'm going to be doing all sorts of, listening to your heart, et cetera. And then when I see things on your skin, if there's a mark or something, I'm going to ask you about that just to make sure that you're healthy. And so you're sort of saying, this is why I'm asking these questions. And then it normalizes it for the child. And then do a lot of the sort of the benign things, the accidental stuff. And then by the time you work your way around to the back and the bruises, it's normalized, it's part of it, it's transparent.
Excellent. And yes, Mara put that in the chat as well. Just explain your role, explain why you're asking what you might ask. Perfect. And one more thing in the chat. You might ask them if they want to see your stethoscope, tell them about how it works, something off topic. The doctor might be scary for children. Good. So yeah, just some relaxing exercises. Perfect. And what might you want to make sure the child knows before they tell you that someone has harmed them, about the process you're going to have to follow should they tell you someone has harmed them? Like what might you want the child to know that you're going to be bound to do if they tell you that somebody has harmed them? Oh, there's a question in the Q&A. Question, is it okay to ask, is this the first time this has happened? I would say that's a fine question, but down the road, once they've told us what has happened. But yeah, I think that's a fine question. Is this the first time that's happened? And I'll look in the Q&A. Can you help the child name actions they're describing? Like if she says Jack inserted his penis, can you provide an explanation stating the action of inserting is called sexual abuse? I would prefer to reflect back the language that the child used rather than define it for them in your terms.
I agree. I think that we want to sort of make sure that we aren't introducing any information. So just ask them more about it. What, when you say he inserted his penis, what do you mean?
Yeah, perfect.
That's a great question.
Yeah, very good question. Okay, so saying something to this child like, I can't keep secrets if I'm worried about you being safe. It's my job to try and help you to be safe, so I'll need to share information. Perfect. I think it's dangerous to talk about secrets. I think it's okay as long as you're saying, I can't keep them. As long as that's your line about secrets, to say I can't keep secrets is a fine thing to say. But yes, we don't want to introduce the idea of keeping secrets if that's not how the child is talking about it. Cool.
And do we need him? Is he required to answer our questions?
Ah, that's a good question.
Right, he's
No.
not. And we need to make sure he knows that.
Yeah.
That he can answer some questions or no questions, whatever. And he can say, I don't know.
Perfect. Yeah. So let the child know that it's up to them what they want to tell us. Okay. Can we go to the next scenario, please?
Yeah, let me just.
So now, oh wait, there's one more. You can't force a child to answer you, and depending on your role, you might not need that much information if you have another way of verifying the information. Excellent. Yeah, good point. Okay, so in this case, we are acting as a school CPO, that stands for Child Protection Officer. So this is the person at the school whose role it is to respond to child protection concerns. So again, we are the second responder. Okay, a question in the Q&A. Sometimes a child demands to know what action an investigator will take against the offender if she discloses information. This is a problem with children of 15 to 17 years of age. What should I do? So if a child's demanding to know what action an investigator takes against the offender, I think you have to be extremely honest that exactly what you're going to do with the information, but there's a point at which it's out of your control what is done to the offender, that you're going to bring the information, whether it's to the police, to the child protection agency, but then they're going to make decisions about how to handle the person who has harmed from then on. Jordan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think you have to be transparent and also say this is a case-by-case basis. Suppose you're the police and they say, what are you going to do?
Good point.
You could say, well, it really depends on the information that I get and how every case is different. So I can't really tell you what would happen. There are a lot of different scenarios, but I'd really like to know more about why you asked that question, or I would need to know more information. And so I put it back on them. And if they say, well, I don't want to tell you unless I know that he's going to get locked up. And then you can sort of say, well, tell me about your concerns. So you're focusing on, tell me about why you don't, the whole concern about him being locked up, and then explore it that way. Yeah. And if there are law enforcement in the audience and you have, or anyone has a different answer, please chime in, because I'd love to hear what others say in those situations.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we are the person within a school environment who responds to child protection concerns in this case. So Olga, who is 15, has a mild intellectual disability and is bullied at school. A friend of hers comes to report that a boy at school befriended Olga and convinced her to have sex with his friends. So Olga has a couple identified vulnerabilities here. One is a mild intellectual disability, and one is that she's being bullied. So then when the friend reports a boy at school has befriended Olga and convinced her to have sex with his friends, what are some of your concerns here? What are your immediate concerns that you want to check in on? Olga's being sexually assaulted. Okay, good. Maura, I will. Okay.
I think safety wise, like I always think about the physical, like, and this might not be right away, but like STDs and sexual health if something is happening.
Good, yeah. So we need to know, is she safe from harm right now? Excellent. Yeah, very good question. Is she safe? Is the friend safe? Do we know who the boys are? In this scenario, we don't yet, but yes, that's something we would need to figure out. So a concern is that Olga's being groomed for sexual purposes, and we need to figure out how to prevent more abuse if this is abuse that's occurring. And we need to figure out how we can protect her. Good. Yeah. So figuring out how to protect Olga. Is it organized exploitation? Are there other victims? Great. Yes, we definitely want to know, are there other victims? Is the friend reporting just as a friend, or might she be a victim? So we do want to figure out if there's other victims, and the other, is it organized exploitation? Good. We need to find out how the friend knows this information to get a sense of whether it's true before we see Olga. Good. Understand what Olga's limitations are, what she may or may not understand. If there are any resources that can help when you speak to her, great. All excellent points. So we want to check in with people who can help us know, hopefully her caregivers. But if not, then perhaps there's someone else at the school who can help us to figure out what kind of questions she's going to be able to answer. Do we need to notify her caregivers? That is a good question. In this case, where it's child on child abuse, I think bringing the caregivers in as quickly as possible is generally a good idea. Because this is a 2-sentence scenario, we can each bring our own interpretation of it here, but generally when a child is being abused by somebody outside of the family, we do want to bring the family members in as quickly, the caregivers or the parents in as quickly as possible. Anything to add to that, Jordan?
No, I think that, and they're going to find out. I mean, this is going to be something that's going to have to go to a higher level. So the parents are going to find out. So, yeah.
Where did this happen? Yep, we want to find that out. And we want to thank the friend. Excellent. We want to thank the friend for sharing info with us and validate that it must have been hard to speak up. Yes.
Good. Yeah. Because she's violated that adolescent taboo of telling a secret to an adult. You know, it was very brave of her to do that. So that's, yeah, we need to tell her that was a good thing.
We also want to check in with her. Is she, make sure whether she has been traumatized by this, how she might be feeling just about knowing this is happening between her classmates. So we want to check in with her and make sure that we are supporting her as she might need it. So yeah, we want to the friend, we want to make sure we thank her, that we tell her the next steps we're going to take, but that we won't be able to share any information we find out with her. And tell the friend that we will check in with her again, though, to see how she's doing. And we might ask the friend, do you think Olga's safe right now? Or do you think we need to go find her right now? And might just do a quick check on whether there's any risk of self-harm with anybody involved. And the friend might, probably isn't the one to answer that about anybody but herself, but just to check on that. And then what are some things we want to make sure we say when we do talk to Olga? So once we've figured out exactly what kind of information Olga might be ready to share, what kind of questions we can ask, what are some things we want to make sure before we start a conversation with Olga? So this is not your fault. Good. So I think we want to phrase it something like, if anybody is harming you, it's not your fault, and we want to help you. Because we don't know where Olga's at. She might think she has a boyfriend. She might legitimately have a boyfriend. Maybe he thinks it's a relationship of love too. Maybe it's not true that it's with a whole bunch of boys, but just one boy, and maybe they are boyfriend, girlfriend. So we do want to get to the bottom of it before we assume any sexual assault is happening, but we do want to let her know if someone's harming you, it's not your fault. So make sure Olga understands what we're saying and asking, use language she understands. Good. So before you use any vocabulary with her around sexual assault or sex period, we want to make sure that she understands the terms that we're using. Speak to her on an intellectual level. Good. So we want to find out what that is from her caregivers or from someone who works closely with her at the school beforehand. How do we prevent her from sharing this information with her peers or others in school? That is a great question. And I'm going to say at a school level, that's why you always want to have a child protection team where you can figure out together what are the specifics to this case, what are the specifics about the children involved, and how can we help to make sure that all the children involved remain safe. So how can we help Olga? And maybe we can't. Maybe we know it's something that is already out. Maybe the friend has already told 5 people before she told us. So we just need to start mitigating the damage that might be done, figuring out a communication plan for how we are going to address rumors that might be out there, or what we might do, just how you might communicate with all students in a way that isn't giving them any information, but that is helping them deal with information that they might have, if that makes sense. So it might be having the counselor come in and talk to all of the students who are, in an age group where they might have been affected by hearing about this, and making sure that you're talking to them in general terms about things like secondhand trauma, sexual assault, power dynamics in relationships, consent, all of those things. Jordan, anything to add there?
Now, I think that's really good. And I would also talk to this friend and say just how important it is for her not to tell other people, and why, and ask her if she has, and that, okay, if you have, that's fine. Let's just talk about that. And then, so who knows, and what she should say if somebody comes up to her and asks questions. So she has some tools in her tool belt about how to respond from here on out. And then support her in that would be what I would suggest as well.
Great. Maura, I saw your hand up for a minute. Did we address what you wanted to say?
Oh, this is a good one. How do you handle Olga wanting to know how you found out?
Is that in the,
Yeah. What would you say, Debbie?
where did?
It's in the chat. How do you handle Olga wanting to know how you found out?
I see it there. Okay, thank you. There's another question in the Q&A as well. Ooh, that is a great question. I think we can say someone brought a concern to us. Maybe they saw something, maybe they heard something, that they were very worried about you and they just wanted us to check in with you and make sure that you're okay. That said, I would definitely run that phrasing by the school counselor or someone who works closely with Olga. Just making sure that, I think you also need to read how Olga's asking the question. Olga might be very, very angry that somebody sees this as a concern, might be proud that she has a boyfriend, and thinks that somebody reporting it as a concern is unfair to her. So I think that you need to, number one, read the question and see how she's going to feel about it. And number two, make sure that you are working with a team at the school who understands the children involved in the situation, especially the school counselor. Jordan, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Again, exploring, why that matters. Why is she asking? What does she feel about it? Sort of always putting it back on her so she can explain what she's feeling.
Yeah, good. And then the question, is it okay to get permission from the friend to say it was her? You can ask the friend. However, if Olga seems angry that somebody came forward, then you might not want to rat out the friend in that situation.
And that's a great way to empower the friend. Say, how do you
Yes.
feel about this? What should we say? If Olga asked me, what should we say? That's a great way to empower the friend.
It is. And often, students of middle school, high school age, want a friend present. Like, I want to talk to you, but I want my friend in here. So as long as they're consenting to that and the friend is consenting to that, then that's fine as well. So you might ask, Olga might want to have them there. Okay, two things. So legally, you might not be able to disclose the person reporter. Oh yeah, no. You should not disclose without permission for sure. And legally, you might not be able to disclose at all. I think it's more about how you phrase to Olga, whether it's somebody had a concern about you, because that alone might offend Olga to the point that she no longer wants to talk to us. Or if it's, I observed something or whatever. It needs to be very carefully thought out what is said to make Olga not feel ashamed, that somebody saw something that should make her feel ashamed. In Portugal, we don't have that kind of team at school. Educators usually don't want to know. Okay. True. And a lot of schools do not have a team like that. I do think when something this big comes up, it can't be one person alone making all the decisions. However, that said, if you do have a strong child protection organization in the country where you're working or living, well, both working and living, then maybe you don't need to go this far into it. And maybe you do just turn it over to the organization outside of the school and let them deal with everything, whether it's child protective services or law enforcement or whomever. So perhaps in Portugal, you have a strong health and human services, child protective services that you could have turned this over to earlier, in which case you might not need as strong of a team at the school.
If you are interested, for people who are in education, there are a lot of resources that Debbie has already really put together on an education portal. Debbie, you want to mention that? Because that could be really helpful.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll put a link in the chat. I don't want to take credit for all that's in there currently. I am working to update it, but I will put a resource in the chat for anybody who's in a school environment.
And then there's a question in the question and answer. How do you reassure a child who is afraid of repercussions, like a threat from the abuser, that they will not get into trouble without making it sound like a promise? Such a good question.
That
Debbie,
is a
you want
very
to
good question.
Do you want to answer?
I'll start, and I would love to hear your input.
Okay.
I think all we can say is, I'm going to do everything I can to help you with this situation. And don't make a promise that you can't keep, but let the child know that if someone's harming them, what the laws are, what the procedures are, and use those things to try and reassure them that they've done the right thing by coming forward. You are going to act, and you are going to act in a way that you are trying very hard to do everything that's in the best interest of the child so that they will not be harmed any further. Jordan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I think let's say the child says, I have a secret but you can't tell anyone. So I haven't even told you yet, but it's something bad coming down the pike. Then I would say I can't keep a secret, the whole thing about I can't keep a secret because if someone is perhaps hurting you or hurting somebody else, then other people need to know about to help ensure safety. So we have explained that. Well, I don't want to tell you then. You can say, I would really like to know, but I understand you're reluctant. So can you tell me why it is you don't want anyone to know? What would happen if somebody knew? And you can also explain, if you tell me something that makes me concerned for your own safety, then I would need to do X, Y, and Z, whatever the policy is. So you're sort of spelling out, you're being very transparent and saying, and they might say, oh my God, I don't want you to call the police. then you can also talk more about their reluctance. And then I'm concerned about your safety since you seem very reluctant. And I want to make sure that, no, I don't want to make sure. I want to help you in any way that I can. Can you talk about your concerns? And if they don't want to tell you the secret, they may tell you why they don't want to tell you the secret. So that might sort of lead the back door into more information. But at least we need to get to the bottom of what their fears are, because the police need to know if the child is in danger. And so any information we can get about that could be very helpful in helping the child stay safe. And again, we don't want to make the promise if you'll be okay. We'll say we'll do everything we can to help you, just like Debbie said. I hope that's clear.
And then a big concern seems to be she's having sex with multiple boys due to potential coercion. Absolutely. And that is what we want to figure out if that is happening.
Exactly.
Possibility of STD or pregnancy, how to approach this concern. We absolutely want to get there. I don't think that needs to be part of this initial interview where we're just trying to figure out what happened. But once we know what happened, then we do want to talk to the caregivers about getting her into a medical appointment as quickly as possible. Okay, and in Portugal, there is a strong response, it seems. And did we, okay, good, we got it.
Yay, good.
Okay. Awesome. So yeah, in talking with Olga in this case, I think we hit on everything. We want to make sure that we have worked in advance to create a safe environment before we bring her in to interview. And that includes figuring out exactly what wording we want to use when we're talking to her. We want to make sure she knows it's not her fault if someone's hurting her. And we want to know her let her know what the process is if someone's hurting her. And we want to ask for her consent to have a conversation with us around it.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you. Jordan, back to you.
Okay. Well, what happens after all this? You've talked to Olga and you've got all this information. What are you going to do with it? Well, it's important to document. Has anybody ever told you this? I'm sure you've heard this. If it isn't written, it didn't happen. So it's really important to document what you learn, even if what your concerns are, you might see as sort of mild concerns, not small stuff. You know, maybe somebody says something a little inappropriate or touches a child, and you kind of get the willies, but it's not a lot. You still need to report that or record that, because it may be that you're the fifth person who's noticed that. And if everybody has written that down, then there's a record saying, okay, whoever this person is acting inappropriately in multiple different occasions. So a minor, quote, minor issue may become a major issue. So it's really important to document. If you can document verbatim, both what you said and what the child said, that's great. Now, we can't always do that, but you can, if you can, that's really good. If not, make it clear that you're not doing, you're not quoting, but you're paraphrasing. And be honest, what you remember and what you don't. I think one of the biggest things for us, though, is no matter where you are in this whole, whether you're first responder, second responder, whatever, is to be very objective. We don't want to talk about our interpretation of what she said. Oh, she was about to cry, looks so sad. We want to say, you know, she teared up, or something that's much more objective, because that's what we can stand by. Tell yourself, you know, am I willing to go to court and swear about what I'm writing down here? That's what you need to be. Then you need to be writing down something you feel very confident you could tell in front of the court. And we want to be very objective so that we're not introducing our interpretations. And we want to make sure that the records that we have are confidential. And typically for all of us professionals, there is a confidential system, but just make sure that. So Olga, let's play out Olga's situation. We've talked to Olga, police are involved. Olga is very traumatized. Her parents are very traumatized. Here is their daughter, their very vulnerable daughter is being exploited. So everybody is traumatized now. It's almost worse than it was because it's in a different way. There's so much going on, so much chaos. So how do we help after the disclosure? Well, some of that is going to be role dependent. If we are a child protective services worker or a victim advocate or somebody, we can do a lot more than if we are, say, the police wouldn't be able to necessarily do all the victim support. But there's some things that are really key. What about helping the traumatized child? What about Olga? I think that in as much as you can arrange to have Olga's routines stay in place so that whatever she does at home, you tell the parents, keep up the routines, bedtime, mealtime, going to school, make sure she goes to school, whatever, if it's safe, so that you maintain those routines. And if you are part of the school staff, then you would want to maintain the routines there, because children thrive on normalcy and routines and being able to predict what's going to happen. So that takes away some of the anxiety. Give the child choices and control whenever possible. And as Debbie so aptly said, don't give a child the choice if you can't honor their choice. But if it doesn't matter to you what choice the child makes, then give them that option. And that helps to build their sense of control, that not everything is out of their control. You might want to make sure that the parents understand it and specifically know how to increase their support. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but they need to be aware of, at all times being very supportive, and the teachers in the school or wherever Olga goes, special ed, they need to be aware that this child is in a vulnerable place, needs extra support. We don't need to tell everyone and their brother what happened, but we can say this child's experiencing a high stress situation, needs support, may have behavior changes, be ready to provide support. If you can, ask the parents also to designate a safe place. So if the child, some kids, when they respond to a very traumatic situation, they may have triggers and become extremely anxious or feel like they can't control their emotions. They need a place to soothe themselves. So if you can agree, okay, when this happens, this is the place you can go where it's quiet, there's some supervision, no one's going to ask you questions, but you're safe there. That might be really helpful. And then anticipating difficult situations. So the teachers at school and the parents are going to want to be able to anticipate what situations during the day might trigger memories of what has happened, may be particularly difficult. So let's say that Olga always rode home on the school bus with her boyfriend, and that's usually when he told her what he wanted her to do. So going to the school bus at the end of the day may be triggering for her. So these anticipate that as being triggering, and so how are we going to support her going to the bus, being on the bus, etc. We also have
a raised hand. Are you good for a question?
Yeah, please. Yes, please.
Okay, Marianne. Oh, Marianne, you're muted.
Yeah, can you unmute yourself, Marianne?
Okay, Marianne, let us know when you're ready. Okay, she's still muted, so.
Okay, so Marianne, just let us know in the chat when you're ready. Keep in mind, as I mentioned, that the family is going to be traumatized as well. And this may be in direct response to what's happened to their child. That is certainly traumatic, finding out that your child has been sexually exploited. But also, in many cases, the caregivers, be they parents or grandparents, have their own trauma history. Intergenerational abuse is common, and working in our child sexual abuse clinic, it was very common to find out that the father or the mother had a prior history of being sexually abused themselves, and in many cases had not had adequate support and services at that time to really work through that. So now that their child is being sexually exploited brings back not only what's happening to their child, but all that prior trauma that was never resolved. And so it may be very difficult for them to be supportive and to understand what's happening to their child, and use a trauma-informed approach. It may be very hard, and it may be very hard for them to make practical decisions. Very basic executive functioning may be difficult because they are so traumatized, and so we may have to help them really make concrete decisions. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? How are you going to bring her to the hospital? How are you going to bring him to the doctor? Whatever it is, help practically and emotionally. They may have difficulty controlling their own emotions, and so may not be able to be supportive. And so there are instances where a parent may feel so bad about what's happened to them, feel so guilty about what's happened to their child, that they react by being angry with their child. And that's their way of coping with all of this anxiety. And so they may have difficulty coping and reacting appropriately to the child. So part of what we can do is provide psychoeducation, and this is to not only to the caregiver but also to the child as well. Tell them about how trauma, their own trauma when they were a child, and their child's trauma affects their own beliefs, the way they see the world, the way they act, the way they think, the way their emotions. And so they can begin to understand, why am I so angry at my child? It's not just sort of vague anger, rage that they can't put their arms around. They understand it's a response. Why is it a response? It's my response to what's happened to me and what's happened to my child. I feel guilty. I feel helpless. So you're helping them understand their own emotions and understand how children, various ages, Olga, who is 15, maybe operating at a 9-year-old level, her behaviors, her beliefs, the things she says, should be interpreted through that trauma lens. And we need to make sure the parents understand that, because then they will be able to be more supportive and non-judgmental. If Olga starts running away from home or locking herself in her room, the parents, instead of feeling rejected or angry, can say, okay, this is her way of dealing with her stress. How can I be supportive? We need to talk to them about building a sense of safety at home, anticipating trauma triggers. What are trauma triggers, and how can the parents understand that and try to anticipate them and avoid them? These are all, this basic psychoeducation can help the parents be more supportive. And it can also help the child understand their own feelings. If a child understands that their trauma is the reason why they're exploding in the middle of class, or getting very angry at their friends, or running away from home, it's easier for them to control their emotions and regulate ultimately, and they don't feel like they're crazy. So just to conclude, in cases of abuse, neglect, exploitation, a child statement is really critical. We can get critical information from very young children, but we have to know how to ask questions and be very careful about it, so that we don't sort of accidentally lead the child to provide information that's inaccurate. So we need to take care. We need to be trauma informed. We need to be supportive, not only in how we ask the questions, but just in the way that we ask them, in a non-judgmental, very open way, interpreting their behavior, which may seem odd to us, or may seem very off-putting. We need to interpret that through the trauma lens. This is the way the child is coping. And we need to find ways to support not only the child, but the family after the disclosure, because the child is spending the majority of their time with a family, and those are critical players. As we know, one of the strongest predictors of how a child is going to recover from abuse, neglect, exploitation is the degree of support they get from very trusted adults and people close to them. So we need to help the family support the child. I've been really privileged to be able to talk to you, and I really appreciate people's input, and I look forward to the rest of the time getting information again from Marion. Marion, if you're able to just unmute yourself. I'd love to hear more from you all, because we learn, Debbie and I learn as much as we impart. Debbie, do you have any words?
Yeah, thank you all for being so interactive. I appreciate all the questions and comments throughout, so thank you very much for that. And we are here for as long as you have questions, we're here.
And afterwards, sometimes you may think of questions at some other point. So don't hesitate to email us with questions tomorrow or next week or 6 months from now. Hopefully not tonight when I'm asleep, but any other time. And if we don't know the answer, we'll find somebody smart who does, and then we'll get back to you with the answer. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you both so much. And thank you again for everyone's participation. It was really great. And just to reiterate what I put in the chat earlier, we will follow up with an email that'll include the slides, additional resources, and the recording of this presentation. And then I'll also make sure to include y'all's contact information. So if there is additional questions, you can reach out there or to the information email, and I can direct to Debbie or Jordan, depending on what your question is.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah.
And we did get a question in the chat. What are your recommendations when problems with caregivers arise due to their own trauma or past history?
Yeah, that is such a, do you want to answer that, Debbie?
Well, I'm going to go, I heard you say that it's good to explain to them why they might be having, if you feel like it is something that might be due to their own trauma, to help them understand that, to help, or even if it's not, even if it's just really difficult to hear that your 15-year-old daughter might have been raped, or whatever the situation is, you might help them process those feelings, help them figure out why they're having them and how they can get through them in a positive way. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons that parents might have difficulty hearing something horrible that's happened to their child. And if you're having to confront parents, because it's them who have somehow harmed their child. You want to make sure you're fully ready for that situation, that you have hopefully laid the groundwork where they know why you might be confronting them. Like if I'm coming from a school background, so I'm thinking that if there's a situation where a school might get involved, the school wants to make sure parents know that in advance, that if we hear that your child's being harmed, we're going to intervene, because that makes it easier when you do need to intervene. Yeah, I think that's probably a training on its own to figure out if you're actually talking to a parent about harm that they've done to the child. But it is important to just be honest, to offer resources, to figure out what the problem is within the family and how you can help them to get through it. Jordan, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I think that, let's say Olga's mother has been responding to this. It's been a week since this has come to light. Police are working on this case. Olga's mother is now very angry with Olga. And so you may want to talk to her about that. And so you could open the conversation by saying, you know, there's been a lot going on the last week. How have you been coping with this? So you're focusing on Olga's mother. Well, she can talk about what she sees and ask open-ended questions, find out what her attitude is toward Olga, what she's thinking about, what other people in the family are thinking about. You're just information gathering to figure out why she's acting this way. And then you can sometimes, and then at the end, you can say, you know, sometimes we find that parents, it's especially hard because they have their own trauma histories and things that are going on in their lives in the past. And that makes it even harder. I don't know if that's relevant for you or not. And then she can say yes or no, or, you know, sort of say, other parents have told me that sometimes this is an issue, so that you can kind of normalize it, and then she can bring it up. Sometimes, as we know, parents, whether they've been abused or not in the past, often feel very guilty about what has happened to their child. They feel they should have known, they should have prevented it, and so we can acknowledge that. Often parents tell me that they feel really guilty about things, and even though there's no way they could have known it, they still feel that guilt. Is that something you wrestle with or something? So that they can feel like, yes, they can talk, or they can say no, it's not. But I think opening it, normalizing it, and then sort of just broad open-ended questions to get a lay of the land is the way to go.
Normalizing is a great, normalizing is a great tactic with a lot of these difficult conversations.
And then if you can have resources available for adult counseling, that's, you know, even better, because we don't necessarily we're not necessarily equipped to deal with it ourselves, but we can say, look, there's help. A lot of people have been through this and they've gotten really good help. There are some options. Would you like to hear them?
Excellent.
Great.
Any other questions
Amazing.
before we sign off?
Just real quick while we wait, because we are just at time, but there is a survey on the way out as well. And it really, really helps us to get your feedback on these webinars as we continue to bring the topics that we want to make them as valuable and as useful to you. So if you can take a few minutes to fill that out, that would be great. And if there's not any more questions, I'm not seeing any. Thank you all again for your participation. Thank you, Debbie and Dr. Greenbaum, for a really informative presentation. Have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.